My name is Kora Thomas, and I'm 28 years old. And 6 years ago, I signed military papers instead of college applications. Not because I wanted to serve, but because my parents quietly decided my future mattered less than my younger sister's. And they gave my entire $200,000 share of the college fund to Madison with a casual shrug and a sentence that still echoes in my head. "You'll figure it out. You always do." And that sentence changed everything, because while she moved into a private university dorm and posted photos of decorated rooms and smiling selfies with new friends, I was waking up at 4 a.m. in boot camp, learning how to disassemble a rifle and swallow homesickness in silence. And I didn't argue or beg because I'd learned my whole life that being strong meant being invisible, and needing help meant you deserved it. And Madison always needed help, while I was always fine. And that pattern started when I was 12 and brought home straight A's, and my mom barely looked up from folding laundry. But when Madison brought home a B+, they took her to her favorite restaurant and praised her effort like she'd cured cancer. And I sat there confused, wondering what I had done wrong. And by 16, I understood the rules, even if nobody said them out loud, because Madison got tutors and I taught myself. Madison got a college consultant and I lived in the library. Madison got a car and I got a lecture about responsibility. And every time I questioned it, I was told I was mature and independent and that Madison needed more support. And I internalized that needing less meant deserving less. So when they told me they were giving her the entire fund, I felt something break. But I didn't scream. I just walked away and Googled military education benefits. And 3 months later, I was in basic training, while she was posting orientation pictures captioned, "So blessed." And while she rushed sororities and studied abroad and attended formals, I was pulling night shifts, counting every dollar, and watching my parents' Facebook become a shrine to her achievements, with no mention of me. And when I sent photos from training, I got short replies like, "Good job," or sometimes nothing, except from my Aunt Helen and my grandmother, who seemed worried in a way I didn't understand, especially when Grandma once told me that strength shouldn't mean struggle, and that some things aren't what they seem. And I didn't realize how true that was until 6 years later, when I came home with discharge papers and savings that barely covered 4 months of civilian life, sat at a family dinner, listening to Madison talk about Harvard and Wharton and Stanford, while nobody asked about my deployments or how I was coping, noticed the new furniture and renovations and her new car, and realized nobody had actually missed me. And then I found the Veterans Support Group and met Jake Morrison, who listened to my story and asked the question nobody else had asked. Did your grandmother actually agree to give all the money to Madison? And that question haunted me until I called Grandma, and she told me the truth in a voice colder than I'd ever heard, that the trust had explicit instructions for equal distribution, and my father had violated them, and that they'd already contacted an attorney and were investigating. And when I saw the documents showing 6 years of withdrawals, forged signatures, and criminal charges like embezzlement and fraud, I felt my entire childhood rearrange itself in my mind. And when I confronted my parents and they begged me not to make it public and to think about Madison's career, something in me turned cold, and I realized they cared more about appearances than accountability. And when Madison's MBA graduation party arrived at a country club with 150 guests and banners and speeches praising my parents' sacrifices, I sat there silent while my dad bragged about investing in excellence. And then my 82-year-old grandmother stood up and calmly destroyed the illusion by distributing folders of evidence and announcing the fund terms and the forged signatures and that she was pressing charges. And I watched gasps ripple through the room, watched Madison's professors question her ethics, watched my parents crumble, watched whispers spread like wildfire, watched the consulting firm supervisor pull Madison aside, and watched my father sob when additional fraud and personal expenses were revealed. And I felt no triumph, only a heavy sense that truth had finally arrived, and nobody was ready for it.
And when the party dissolved and guests quietly distanced themselves and the country club demanded payment and relatives questioned loans and friendships shattered, I realized social consequences can be as devastating as legal ones. And when Madison told me her job offer had been rescinded and her reputation was damaged, I felt complicated sadness because she was still my sister, even if she had benefited from stolen money. And when my parents were charged, agreed to restitution, and my father pleaded guilty and refinanced the house and started probation, I felt a strange mix of justice and grief because money can't fix being forgotten. And when the first restitution payment arrived, I didn't celebrate. I invested it like a reminder of stolen years. And when Madison later met me for coffee and offered her own repayment plan and admitted she had justified favoritism and therapy had opened her eyes, I saw a version of her I'd never known, one who was flawed but honest. And when Thanksgiving came and I chose Jake's family over mine, and my mom demanded to know how long this would go on, I understood that boundaries hurt, but pretending hurts more. And when my dad sent a detailed apology, acknowledging every harm he'd caused, I felt something shift but not heal, because healing takes time and consistency. And with the restitution money, I paid off my loans and bought a small condo and planned to start a veterans mentorship program, because if I'd learned anything, it was that strength shouldn't mean isolation. And I still think about that sentence, "You'll figure it out," and how it pushed me into the military and into independence and into survival mode, and how it took a public reckoning, forged documents, a courtroom, and an 82-year-old grandmother with the courage to speak truth to undo a decade of lies. And this story isn't about revenge or winning. It's about what happens when favoritism turns into fraud and silence turns into accountability, and a forgotten daughter finally refuses to be invisible. And if you're listening to this and see pieces of your own family in it, know that being strong doesn't mean you deserve less, and questioning unfairness doesn't make you bitter. It makes you honest. And sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it detonates everything built on lies. And walking away from people who hurt you isn't betrayal, it's survival. And rebuilding your life after betrayal is slow and messy and emotional, but it's also powerful because for the first time, you're building something that's truly yours, not something stolen, not something gifted with strings attached, but something earned with clarity, boundaries, and the courage to finally say, "I deserved better."